Okay, great. So welcome. Thank you all for coming. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Bruno Sussat, and I am Director of Emerging Tech here at Plexal. I sit in the Innovation Services team. This event is to celebrate Pride Month, and this year marks 50 years of Pride in the UK, and 53 years since the Stonewall riots and the origins of the Pride March. So Pride Month lasts throughout June. Typically we'll do an event like this, but this is probably the first one that we've done in 3 years, given the pandemic and everything that's been going on. So great to have you all with us in person. Just some housekeeping. There will be some drinks and pizzas afterwards, so I think from about 6 o'clock. The team will be around for questions if you wanted to grab people, and the session will be followed with a quick Q&A. I think it's really important for us to start by saying why these events are still needed. And I think over the last 50 years, we've seen huge transformations in the way that LGBTQIA+ people are treated, but there are also still a staggering amount of cases where equality isn't present. I mean, take the last year, obviously in the East particularly, we've seen massive declines in the way that LGBTQ+ people are treated in terms of equality. The war, Putin's war on the Ukraine and Russia, and in Hungary also. I had the pleasure of going on holiday with my boyfriend Joe a couple of weeks ago. Weirdly, I'm really nervous today, I'm not sure why. And I thought I was about to open a really trashy mag and like have a great holiday read, and I flicked to the first page and I was just bombarded with a load of current day events that were talking about essentially the war on the LGBTQIA community. And I thought it'd just be good for us to maybe highlight some of those now, just to talk through why we need these events, and then we'll jump into our panel discussion. So I think there is a current narrative in the LGBTQIA+ community where people say rights in the West are good, in the East they're bad. But I would like to highlight that this article really summarised it quite succinctly. There was one day, March the 8th, we're in the US, a lot of the states started using their devolved powers to draw back on the legalization of same-sex marriage that was enrolled in 2015. So in Florida, the Florida Senate passed the Don't Say Gay bill. In South Dakota, there was a bill that was passed that bans the discussion of divisive concepts like sex, race, and gender identity in college. Idaho passed a bill that would send librarians to jail if they were to give books that talked about queer identity to minors. And New Jersey, well, the New Jersey Supreme Court denied an appeal that would bar religious organizations from rolling out conversion therapy. Massive human rights issues that don't really get talked about, and that's in the US, which is seen as the country of freedom. A little bit closer to home, we have similarities with Boris trying to put a hold on the conversion therapy ban. Once at least some of his memos were leaked, he's taken a step back and said, oh no, we're still going to do that, but remove the trans community from that ban. So again, examples of where our trans community are being left out of equality. So that context was quite important just to talk upon. And now I would like just to hand over to our panellists, some really excellent friends of Plexal, and then we will jump into the panel discussion on how to be an ally.
Thank you, Bruno. Hi, I'm Poppy, she, her. I'm a studio manager at RCCO. I identify as bisexual, but I use that as kind of interchangeably with the word queer, so I'll be using kind of both today. Just for caveat, I've technically been out since I was 14, but I've only kind of been participating in kind of queer circles and in queer society, as it were, for the last 6 months, so I'm kind of very much at the beginning of my journey. So just to kind of give you context around my perspective.
Hello everyone, I'm Jane Stanley. I'm head of sectoral engagement at DCMS, and I work really closely with Plexal on the Cyber Runaway project. I use pronouns he, him, and I have been an out gay men
Plexal that I actually work there as well. On the marketing team of the real work it's done. And I identify as bisexual, and my pronouns are he, him. And I've been out since my early 20s, so kind of about 5 or 6 years now. I wouldn't say I'm a massively active participator in the LGBT community, but I do have quite specific interests in the kind of causes and rights issues that come up that made me really want to be on the panel tonight.
Thank you all. And I think one of the things that it's really important for us to flag, obviously we have a great panel here, but we aren't representative of the entire community. We can't talk to certain aspects of intersectionality or particular gender identities. We will try our best, but please do consult resources and chat to us after if there are additional things that you need to know. Also, please do ask questions throughout. We want this to be as informal as possible. Chris, given that you've got a mic then, maybe we can start with you, where the real work is. And I'd like to start just by asking you, how do you define allyship, and what is an ally?
So, to me, it's a very interesting question because I, like I said, haven't really felt like a super strong participant in the LGBTQIA plus community. Honestly, since I came out and decided that that was sort of where I wanted to be. I can now tell my close friends, I can tell my close family, but more or less I otherwise sort of went on living my life as, to most people, I think people assume I'm a cisgender straight man. Obviously I am cisgender, I'm not straight, but that's an easy kind of thing to allow people to believe. And so I didn't really go through the early period of coming out feeling really strongly, yeah, I am in need of allies to support me. I really need to go out there and be a strong ally to loads of other people. But 4 years ago now, actually, it's been a while, I met my current partner, who is a wonderful trans woman whom I love very much. And I supported her in that time through a lot, a couple of very intense times in her life, and that really rammed home for me why exactly we still have an issue, because I got to experience sort of a lot of our day-to-day life goings on and find that there is a lot of discrimination that goes on, and that might be something she's experiencing directly to her face, or it might be something that she's reading in the news. It might be, as you mentioned, a conversion therapy ban that was recently tweaked to exclude trans conversion therapy and so on. So from my perspective, allyship is really important, and what it means to be an ally is someone who is prepared to look at a problem that is not affecting them and say, that's wrong, and I'm going to do something about that.
Great. James, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
No, I totally agree with Chris, and I think to be a good ally is standing up for gay people, even if there aren't any gay people around, not letting those homophobic or transphobic comments slip past and challenging them, and how I hope to challenge racism or misogyny if I hear it. So that's why I would define good ally, standing up for us even if we're not never even there with you.
Great, and I think I'm really looking forward to asking so many questions of really interesting points. Poppy, is there anything that you would like to expand on the term allyship and how you see it?
I think I'd like to build on a point that both you and Chris have made, is that it's about kind of understanding privilege. So obviously I've been out in bisexual since I was 14, but obviously I pass. So it's about understanding there was a privilege to that. Or for example, there is a sexuality between my gender identity and also my sexuality, but for example I'm an able-bodied white woman, cisgender woman, so I can't understand the struggles of other people. So it's about standing up and using your privilege and trying to understand and support those who may be underrepresented.
We had a really good conversation earlier on today about language and the importance of language, and I think it would be really great if you could just talk to everyone here about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course. So, as I said, I identify as bisexual, but that sometimes can be seen as quite a loaded term, because I know some people use pansexual, some people use queer, which I think we discussed, James, about the use of the word queer and how that can be also be very loaded, but I'll let you cover that. But for me, I use the word queer because sometimes basically I'm just not heterosexual. I can't, I'm not in the mood to explain, or I may be in a certain kind of circle where everyone identifies as queer. So I think language is a really interesting one. I think it's about understanding that language does evolve. but also understanding that you may not get it right, and especially again that loops back around to allyship, that if you think you're not getting it right, do your own research first and foremost, of course. Not everyone wants to educate you, and a lot of people are very tired of educating people. Yeah, and also, just understand that language is fluid, listen to people when they give you feedback, and just do your own research, and whatever you identify as, you don't have to kind of defend it, but understand that some people need to have offensive words to use it. I think James would be good to pick up on the use of British using our search.
Yeah, so queer is a slur, but it has been reclaimed by the LGBTQ community. But for many gay men, they still find it really offensive. When I grew up in the 80s and 90s, it was like one of the worst words, which would be called again and again in the playground, and they're not ready to reclaim it. So this terminology, it takes a bit of navigation and sensitivity around what you use with the different people. So say you're heterosexual and you call someone queer, some gay men might find that incredibly offensive and get incredibly offensive about using that term. Personally, I do define as gay, I don't define as queer, but I don't mind people redefine themselves as queer and actually see the utility in it, because obviously we will say like the gay community and gay people, and that can be quite centre men again in that community, while queer is a bit more of all-encompassing term.
Great, and I think, we spoke earlier about gay feeling like it's representative of predominantly white men. I mean, all of us on this panel are white. But we do need to change the way that we engage with language. I think the point that you made, Poppy, around people doing research and language evolving, I think one of the important additions to add there is, if you get something wrong, that isn't the end of the world, because it might be wrong today, or it might have been right 3 weeks ago, but now context has changed. And as context changes, language needs to change with it. And so almost like not having your backup is really important if somebody is to say, actually, can I please correct you on that, because this is why that word means this particular thing to me. And it might mean something to you, Poppy, and it might mean something to you, James. Chris, is there anything that you'd like to touch upon on the language element?
Yeah, I think actually, I just want to briefly walk back to a comment you made, Poppy, when you were talking about the idea of being bisexual or pansexual. And I think that is a kind of key point to pick up on, because it shows how the language isn't necessarily objectively correct even within the community, in the sense that there isn't one right answer. I've used the term bisexual to describe myself tonight because I want to be really clearly understood by everyone who's here, but if I wanted to be more accurate, I probably would have used the term pansexual to encompass everyone. Why would I have done that? Well, because technically the term bisexual is exclusive of non-binary people. At the end of the day, there's some implication there that I am not going to be attracted to someone who doesn't identify as male or female, because that's what if I declare bisexual, that's my preference, either men or women. My pansexuality is something that I consider sort of generally inclusive, and that's what really describes it. If I come out and necessarily say that to someone straight away, it's not a commonly used term necessarily outside the community. So yeah, within groups, you sometimes have to sort of make that, I don't want to say sacrifice, because I hope I didn't make anyone feel excluded here, and if I did, I'm very sorry. But just that choice that I'm trying to communicate and trying to make a point clear, so I use the term bisexual as a shorthand. But there's a lot, and I don't want to go into the subject of labels now, because there's a lot that can be said about labels, and how much they do and don't apply. But I think that's a kind of interesting thing to hit on, is that when you try and use them, sometimes you aren't always communicating clearly, and sometimes that's okay, and sometimes it's not.
You use the term coming out then, Chris, and that's not something that we've spoken about yet collectively. I'd like to bring the conversation back to the workplace. This is all around how can we use allyship at work and beyond. It would be good to understand maybe your experience about having to come out in the workplace, and ask that question to all of you. I'm not sure if anybody wants to jump in first. And I guess the need or how to position that, and what organisations can do to better support that.
I'm going to pass this on pretty quickly, actually, because I don't have a hugely. I think my coming out in my workplace at Plexal was largely when I emailed Phoebe and said, hey, I'd like to be on the Pride panel, by the way, I'm bisexual. Just because I think this is my assumption of how people are interpreting me, but I probably come across as just, a cis straight man to most people, and I don't go out of my way to correct that if I think someone's made that assumption. That might be something I'm doing. My partner is a woman, okay, as we discussed, I was a trans woman, but I don't bring that up to everyone, so people hear me talk about my relationship and might assume I'm straight, which could totally be a real relationship with a trans woman, that works. So I'm going to pass this on.
I do think for many LGBTQ people joining a new workplace can be a really nervous experience because it is about coming out all again to people you have to work. A large part of your day with, and it can be a really nervous experience, and that's why it's really important for organisations during the onboarding process to make it clear that they support queer people and they have the policies in place to support them. It's really terrible working in homophobic environments. I've had really bad experiences when I was starting out in my career. I had a really homophobic boss who, every time he asked me a question in an email, he'd spell queries with 2 E's. It was really bad. So, having good policies and procedures in place to support LGBTQ people is really good. The civil service is a really good employer in that respect. We have an LGBTQ network. They put on events. They put on talks. We have external speakers come in. They share information. So you feel really supported there. And if you want to get the best out of your staff, you want them to feel supported and feel like they can be themselves and share their ideas and share their experiences. And that's what's really important for organisations to have these things in place.
Thank you, James. And Poppy, you work for a very different organisation to DCMS. It would be good to understand a little bit about your experience.
Well, I came out to Phoebe at Plexal by badgering her about the queries meetup, so I think that's when she figured out I might not be homosexual. But with regards to RCCO, who I work for, I at no point felt discomfort to not come out, which there's an argument as to whether we should have the need to come out, but it's something that I had a very frank conversation with my CEO, Jordan, about very kind of early on in my employment, and it was met with kind of like minimal reaction, but in like a positive way, it was not a big thing. One thing I have experienced at previous job roles, which I think maybe age might come into it, and age of the company, because we're a very young company. RCCO is celebrating our 4th birthday this year, tomorrow. And Jordan is in his mid-20s, a lot of our team are in the mid-20s, and I think there is a kind of age thing where a lot of the kind of prejudice that I've experienced is with potentially older people who have gone, you're not bisexual, you've got a boyfriend, and then obviously the usual kind of homophobia stuff that comes with that. So for me, I think there is an element of we work in a very creative industry, and a lot of our partners and our clients are built off the back of, for example, the examples that Google are very inclusive, so they're one of our main clients. I know that they are problematic, but things like they are for many, many, many reasons. But it's something that across the kind of creative industries, I've seen that people are generally not accepting or just don't care, which is what we're striving for, right? But it just doesn't matter. Also being a much younger team, and also I hope that we are as well being responsible towards our company. We're a company that's growing very much, and it's something that I'm really keen as both an ally and an LGBTQIA+ person to ensure that others have the great experience that I have.
Great. And so very closely linked to that, what do you think, and this is a question for all 3 of you, what do you think organisations can do better to be allies?
So it links back to what you said, Bruno, about getting it wrong. I think it's putting on your big person pants and going, all right, we messed that one up. We shouldn't have supported that client. We shouldn't have worked with that partner. We shouldn't, we got it wrong. We're going to do better. We're going to work internally to consult with people within our company that may be part of an underrepresented group, whatever that means, and just go, yeah, we got it wrong. We're going to change, and then actively apologise and then change it. If that makes sense, which kind of goes with allies and companies.
James?
I've been ambushed. This came on very quickly. I think actually I completely agree. I think one of the strongest ways a company can support its LGBT employees is by demonstrating loyalty and acceptance. What do I mean by loyalty? Well, you talked about clients and potentially problems with clients a second ago, and I think one of the strongest things you can possibly do to demonstrate your support from your employees is to not work with a client that has disrespected them, and has been homophobic or biphobic or whichever particular phobia was wrong in that situation. If you show your employee that you value them, their experience over potentially, what might be an important progression of the business, because you don't want to work with clients like that, then I think you've really shown what you're putting first in that situation, and that's what it's about. It's about putting the needs of your employees and their well-being first. There shouldn't be something more important. There shouldn't be a situation where you expect one of your employees to just laugh off a comment that might have been made because it's expedient for a client you're trying to land, or a pitch you're doing to a VC or whatever. Showing that the most important thing to your organization is your employees, their well-being, their happiness, and that they feel safe and respected. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can do that, but I think that's what you're trying to show. That's what you're trying to demonstrate, is that it's the most important thing. It comes above everything else, including your ability to stay profitable. I mean, that's really not thing to do as a company, or is this it's your goal at the end of the day, right? You will fall apart if you don't stay profitable. But maybe that's better than being a company that accepts homophobia.
Thank you. And James, is there anything you wanted to add on to that?
No, I think they covered it pretty well. Again, I just think you need to have the policies and procedures in place to support staff. Make sure you've done the reading, I think get clear for your employees that they know they're going to be supported if they have an issue or a problem in the workplace.
Great. And very quickly then, because I know we want to leave some time for questions. As an individual, what can individuals do better to be allies?
I think what I'd recommend all individuals to do is probably, if you're on social media, just try and find a few LGBTQ news sources to follow, just so you can be better informed about what's going on in the world. I think it's very easy to miss these kind of stories, which are very shocking to your queer friends. For example, what's happening in America now is actually really frightening. But I speak to my straight friends, and they have no idea what's going on. There's all this discourse around gay people being groomers. They're attacking drag queens doing story time book readings, and that's very easily going to go into maybe stopping people from cross-dressing and attacking trans people. These are things which I'm really worried about, but they may not cut through to the mainstream press. So if you could go out and follow those sources, then just to keep your awareness up about what's happening in the world.
Poppy?
That was a great point, James. To build on that, and also something that I said earlier, is like, do your own research. A lot of people from underrepresented groups, in my personal experience and experiencing other people, is do your own research. Yeah, we're up for answering questions, but we can obviously only answer questions from our own personal perspective. But also, I've answered a lot of questions throughout my entire illustrious career as a bisexual person. But there is a thing such as Google. Like, do your own research, kind of learn as much as you can off your own back. Follow LGBTQA plus news sources, read books by queer people. Have a look at the news occasionally. There's podcasts. There's a whole plethora of internet out there. Happy obviously to answer questions. Please ask questions after this. Is what I mean. I'm saying just do the kind of basic research. It's not our job to educate you at the end of the day, but we will answer questions about our personal experience.
You referenced some media outlets then. If you had to suggest any specific resources.
I can only speak from my personal experience as a cisgender bisexual woman, but one really interesting source has been a website called Autostraddle, which the name is very fun. But it's been really kind of educational, where it comes to kind of news sources, opinion pieces, articles, and just kind of teaching myself how to navigate this new and very exciting world. So that's why I'd recommend if you want a kind of fem perspective.
Thank you, Poppy. James, any particular resources, film, TV, book suggestions?
Yeah, sure. For a book, I'd probably recommend, I'm going to be very selfish here and recommend one of my friend's books, that is called The Private Joys of Nana Maloney by Okechukwu Nzulu. It's about a young girl growing up, again in my hometown of Manchester. Manchester, exploring her identity and her sexuality, and it's a really good book, so please go out and buy it and make sure it goes up the bestsellers list. For TV, I would recommend the HBO adaptation of Angels in America. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, it's a very famous play. It's about the AIDS epidemic in America. But it's not just about AIDS, it's this massive fantasy. It's got angels, it's got rabbis, it's got Roy Cohn, it's got Emma Thompson, it's brilliant. So, yeah, please go and watch that.
And yeah, Chris, I know you have an eclectic film and TV.
I know I shared those earlier, but actually, since we're asking for media, I'm just going to share one particular thing. If there was one thing I would want everyone to go away and look into and maybe read, there's a book by a young British trans woman called Sean Fay called The Transgender Issue, that for my money is the best analysis you can find of what it means today in a social respect to be trans, to be what it means scientifically as well, because there's a really strong and incorrect sort of belief out there that being trans or non-binary there's something unscientific about that, and it really sort of breaks down why that isn't the case. But also, from a very specifically British perspective, highlights the fact that we live in not a uniquely transphobic country, but for a country that prides itself on being a mature Western developed democracy with a good record on human rights. We don't actually have one of those, but we like to pretend we do. It is, trans people are being left a long way behind in a lot of ways. The exclusion from the conversion therapy bill is just one of them, but they are consistently ignored or deprioritized for healthcare by the NHS. Waiting lists for gender-reaffirming surgeries can be years and years. The hoops you're forced to jump through to get a gender recognition certificate. I could go on for a long time, but just to summarize, Transgender Issue by Sean Fay really does shine the best light possible on exactly what is going on to trans people in this country and what is so generally appalling about it.
Thank you all. We still have some time for questions. Hopefully there are lots. I won't put anybody on the spot, but does anybody want to put their hand up? Yes, Hannah?
Yeah, just one about the onboarding process, James, what you were saying as well. So we've just done our handbook, and we're generally kind of, I'll say umbrella terming a lot of the D&I policy, so to cover everything that we can. Yeah. Is there more that we can do that's sort of specific for certain communities? Because like I said, we don't want to have, well, I say we don't want to have, we actually don't know, but like a specific policy for a racial bias or for a gender bias or for LGBT plus bias. How do we kind of go about that in a good way?
I think it's just to do your research and make sure you've got all the terminology right and you're pointing to the right resources in that process, and you make it clear that if there are any issues around homophobia, that you'll support your staff. And I think it's especially important, and I'm sure you've already covered this, that when you're collecting diversity information, that you do that right, because I see far too often when I'm having my details collected, for example, under gender, the drop-down menu says I'm male, female, transgender, and it's just, that happens far too often. So yeah, just making sure you're following best practice is what I'd recommend.
Any other questions?
I have
Jen?
one. It's not about the workplace though, sorry.
No, that's great.
It's about raising the next generation. Do you have any advice for cisgendered, heterosexual parents raising children to be, aware and allies as they, what would you have liked,
Well, I would have liked a few more storybooks which isn't all around heterosexual relationships and a bit more diversity in the stories, because I grew up in the 80s and 90s in rural Dorset, and representation has come on leaps and bounds since then. I think there were probably about 6 gay people in the entire country when I was growing up. And there was no internet, there was no resources like that to learn about different sexualities and identities. So letting young people learn about identities at a much younger age, and just like improve everything for everyone, I think.
I was just going to say, my one issue with books and literature is that a lot of the time they teach tolerance, or they teach, this person is different and that's okay. So I've tried to not go down that route with my son. I try and just find books that have parents who are the same gender, and it's not necessarily the topic of the book, and then we can discuss it if he brings it up, rather than say, that's two mums,
Yeah, it doesn't need to be a didactic book about different relationships. It could just be like a fairy story with a prince meeting his handsome prince, rather than the prince and the princess.
We've had quite a lot of conversations about this, Jen. I think the ultimate conversation was, how can I as a parent not mess up, and how am I going to mess up, right?
I will mess up.
Get things wrong. I'm not a parent, but I think one thing that would have been really great for me growing up, I think representation is really important, but not at the risk of lack of experience. And I think that's why Heartstopper, I'm sure lots of you will have seen it if you haven't, you need to watch it. Alice Oseman's TV series is incredible, but it portrays just like a really great experience for queer kids in school, for trans kids in school. And it tells those stories without having to be about conflict and about just being about their sexual orientation and nothing else. And I think having that experience is really important to cover in literature.
Yeah, I was just Heartstopper is my one-word answer. I think that the amazing thing about kids is that they are born into the world with absolutely no preconception, as is everyone, because they're all good at some point, about what it's supposed to be. And that's why they're so curious. They're constantly learning from the example that is set around them. So I think your point about just surrounding kids with stories in which queer characters whose queerness is not the theme of the story exist is really important. So Heartstoppers, to me, just represented, I don't know if I'd call it typical, it was actually probably quite good, even without the queer elements, for a school age, was it high school sort of ish, romance. We've all seen so many high school romances, and it was just one where the characters, for no reason, was ever really addressed in queer. It was a queer story. It was what it was like to be that kid at school, except you liked, you were a man, you liked men instead. And that's what everyone just needs to be surrounded. If everyone grew up surrounded by examples of completely normalized queer people, I don't want to say you wouldn't have any phobias, because that would be a really tall order, but you'd get rid of a lot of them. You would get rid of a lot of them overnight if everyone just kind of was exposed to that from a young age.
Any other questions? No? Oh, Hannah? Yeah.
Just a little bit, so I heard, Bruno, you and I were talking at one point, and you were saying about the importance of putting your pronouns in email signatures and things. Is there anything else we can do from an individual level that showcases the openness and that kind of side of things?
So from a personal perspective, I think pronouns are a really easy thing to do. They make things a lot easier for people to not have to come out about their specific gender identity if there isn't at face value obvious. Lots of people don't want to go through the fuss of having to come out with their pronouns, so yeah, a quick win. From another individual perspective, like Poppy's already touched upon it, ask questions and ask about people's experiences on things and the context of their experience, or why things are important, or why it is important to include X, Y, Z in the design of anything. I think the sharing of resources, we touch on resources a lot, it's really important, quite an easy thing to do. If you read a great book that happens to have a queer storyline, tell someone about it. You don't even have to reference that it's queer, just tell them it's a good book and see what happens. Does anybody else want to answer that one first before we come to Jess?
One thing is, I think we've been discussing in the practice, is also don't assume, use the word like, don't be like, oh, do you have a boyfriend, do you have a girlfriend, do you have a partner? Or for example, I kind of had the other speaking from past experience here, the whole, but you were dating a woman, I thought you were dating a man. It's like, just don't make, kind of check yourself. Obviously, if you cock up and make a mistake, that's fine, apologise, move past it, but not assuming anything to do with kind of gender, partners, anything. Just kind of use very neutral language where you can. My 2
Chris has a bin problem.
Absolutely. No, I wonder. Actually, I think it was. I don't really want to make another point. I just kind of want to reinforce that it's not necessarily something that comes into everyone's head. But I think for me, it's been a big part of my personal journey is teaching myself to not make assumptions in language, and it really is a genuinely welcoming thing. You'll avoid those like slightly awkward moments that probably just highlighted, like saying to someone, "Oh, do you have a girlfriend?" I say, "No, I'm gay," and it just that's 5 seconds of awkwardness, and you'll get past it. It's 5 seconds of awkwardness that didn't need to happen, and I promise you, they would have noticed if you'd said, "Do you have a partner?" That they're aware. They were probably already braced, given the society we live in, for the question to come, "Do you have a girlfriend?" They wouldn't have to then come out in that moment. Just find ways to just take half a second to think, have I assumed anything in this sentence? Because genuinely, the people to whom it matters will notice. Like it comes across to them very strongly.
Jess, I'm not sure if you had a question or wanted to add to that.
It wasn't really a question, it was just that everyone should watch on Channel 4, Where Have All the Lesbians Gone? It's such a good documentary. Do you not recommend watching it on a plane like I did? It's quite explicit sex scene from Lewis and Walker's father, which I wasn't expecting. And I had to shield it from my elderly next door neighbours on the plane. But it was a really, really good documentary about the term lesbian and about how people are actively shifting a bit more towards queer and not really using the term lesbian anymore. Allegedly. It was interesting.
Not so bad, it's a great film, so I feel it's the one that's covered.
They won't
Yes.
hear that without the mic.
No.
Repeat the name.
Oh,
So
Where Have All the
repeat it
Lesbians
with
Gone?
microphone.
Where Have All the Lesbians Gone? Is the name of the film. Not the question I was asking. So I think that's probably it for Q&A then. We are about, for the next half an hour or so, the wider team will be about if you have any additional questions. There is one thing that we wanted to do today, and that was to launch the Plexal Community Respect Charter. So collectively, with a number of people throughout the building, representing various groups, not just the queer community, but a lot of the other subgroups at Plexal, have formed a bit of a mission statement around what it means to be a part of this community and what are the behaviours that we are looking to encourage within this space and the behaviours that we are looking to shut down. So if you agree with the values that are written and it's something that you feel comfortable doing, we would encourage you all to sign the charter, which is currently placed on a canvas underneath the screen just behind the bleachers and will be hung above the entrance in a couple of weeks. At the end of Pride Month, we will probably look to create some kind of digital version. So that is to sign on behalf of yourself as an individual rather than as or on behalf of the organisation that you're here to represent. Thank you all for coming. I hope that you learned some things and that you hang around for pizza and drinks afterwards. Cheers.